Yeah, what up? It's Paragon once again. I wanted to make a video tonight about Qur'anic science versus biblical prophecy in relation to Jesus Christ. Uh, a friend of mine and I talk a lot about the Quran, and he's very big on the science of the Quran. And something that interests me is that whether or not, when a person reads the Quran, whether in Arabic or not, are they themselves able to see any kind of science in the Quran? When you speak to Muslims, they offer science as a means to proving that the Quran is divinely inspired. And they often say, well, how can the Prophet Muhammad know X, Y, and Z, being that he lived a long time ago? My personal opinion on that is that he didn't know anything extra special. And it reminds me of how some Christians are able to see prophecies in the Old Testament in relation to Jesus. The relationship is that if you give any number of people Bibles and you let them read the Old Testament, even though they're familiar with whom Jesus is, would they be able to pick up any number amounts of prophecies that supposedly lead to his coming? No. And I think the reason is that these prophecies, just like the science in the Quran, come after the person usually becomes a believer, or they stumble upon it, by doing some reading or research. I don't believe that people can, for the most part, find any science in these books. There's rumored to be science in the Bible as well, or prophecy without the aid of somebody who's already a believer. So in order to test this, I wish I could, and I'm putting this out there for opinion as always. How I would test this is that you would take a slice of biblical scripture, the one with the most acknowledged quote-unquote biblical reference to Jesus, maybe Isaiah 53 for example, and then you would give it to any given number of people. And if the person is Jewish, for example, they'll have one interpretation, of course. If they're Christian of one flavor, they'll see one thing. If they're Muslim, they may see something else. And if the person has no idea who Jesus is totally oblivious to any of these, they'll probably walk away with something totally different. You know what I'm saying? Same thing with the science. Most people have to have I think, some sort of science knowledge, right, to be able to pick out the science in the Quran, if there is any. People have different levels of understanding of science. So if a person is highly skilled in, let's say, embryology, right, and then they've never read anything in the Quran dealing with the supposed miracles of embryology or the descriptions thereof, I wonder if that person would say, okay, yeah, this sounds like embryology from what we studied and what we know thus far. And the other thing is that, as far as the Quran is concerned, my assessment of it is that since it's a poem, right? You know, it's open to interpretation like all the old holy books. Basically, it's not as if like the writers of the Quran said, okay, at this point this is science, check it out. You know, this is ahead of its time. You know, it's inferred science, right? And the other thing that I wanted to mention about Quranic science is that as far as I know, and I could be wrong, there's no applied science. I.e., for example, something that would be very of interest to me is like how to cure cancer, for example, or how to turn deserts into places where people can cultivate, since the people back then were desert dwellers, and a lot of them still are. You know, if you can have some science on how to manage that situation, that would be awesome, because they can point to the Quran and then see step by step in an applied science way how to solve those two situations, and that would be quite impressive. The other thing is that, assuming that the Quran, for example, gets some of the science right, is it automatic to assume that the people around that time or before did not know the same thing? Overall, I say that a lot of us, including myself, get caught in thinking that since people lived a long time ago, they didn't know as much as we did, and that's not always the case. Also, sometimes somebody may know something, but it is not written down, and a lot of the stories, of course, were verbal, so whoever writes it down first tend to get credit for it. That's another thing that happens a lot. So same thing, if you give somebody a Bible that is not quite as familiar with the biblical prophecy with Jesus, they probably won't see it. I mean, I would look at some of these prophecies, and you literally would have to know, you would have to have the advantage of knowing the New Testament stories of Jesus to have it make any kind of halfway sense. For example, I think it's Hosea chapter 1 verse 11 or 11 verse 1 about my son coming out of the desert. That has nothing to do with no Jesus, but the Bible, the New Testament writers wanted to be about Jesus. And if you let somebody read it and you ask them, do you see Jesus in this? They'll probably say no. You put some Qur'anic scripture dealing with some sort of science in the mind of the believer in front of someone who has a healthy appreciation and knowledge of science in a particular subject, and then you look and see if they can pick up whatever science that is in the Quran. I don't think, it is my opinion that I don't think that they'll notice anything, because it's just writing. It's just writing. It's just a book. So that's what I want to talk about today. Hopefully I get some healthy I guess questions, observations, or insights from anybody out there. Basically, can non-believers pick up science from the Quran? Can non-believers or people who are just not well acquainted with the books pick up some of the same things that the believers hold dear, namely whether there's science in the Quran, different aspects of scientific things, and biblically speaking, can those people pick up prophecy and dealing with Jesus Christ, especially in the Old Testament? So that's my challenge, that's my thought and video for today, and I thank you for your time, and have a good day.